I'm Indy Neidell, and this is Out of the Foxholes, where I sit her, just like Ron Burgundy. If it says it on the teleprompter, I read it on the teleprompter. This is Out of the Foxholes, where I sit her in the chair of infinite knowledge and answer all your questions about the Second World War. Ali Pro asks, how was relations between Japan and America doing in 1939? Okay. America had looked on cautiously when Japan began heavily rearming and then invaded China in the 1930s. We've made Between Two Wars videos about this. You can find links in the description. Very briefly, though, America is isolationist and does pretty much nothing when Japan withdraws from disarmament deals, rearms her navy, or initiates the Sino-Japanese War. In 1937, though, Japan bombs the gunboat USS Panay in China, causing outrage in America. However, the U.S. still trades heavily with Japan. 80% of Japanese imports come from America. And these are, major war resource things like metal and oil, right? In 1939, the U.S. begins to drop its isolationist position. President Franklin Roosevelt introduces the cash and carry system for basically selling arms to Britain. And American public opinion slowly turns in the Allies' favor as the war gets going. Roosevelt has long wished to take action against Japan, and now he does. He announces that America's pulling out of the 1911 trade agreement, and the two nations did already have a chilly relationship, but it reaches a new low. Roosevelt's action sends a very clear signal. Pull out of China, or face further restrictions, or even a boycott. But Japan is by this time so committed in China, there's no way they are going to pull out. Instead, they start looking southward for other sources of raw materials. When the U.S. announces a partial embargo on shipments of oil, gasoline, and metals in 1940, Japan takes action. They occupy Vichy French Indochina and consider a move against the Dutch Indies, a big oil producer. America is infuriated. Japanese leaders, realizing more and more that they cannot depend on American imports to fuel their war effort, begin making plans to take those resources by force, also realizing that such actions would probably be the straw that broke the camel's back in their relationship with the U.S., they simultaneously begin making plans for an attack on Pearl Harbor. Rui Gaspar asks, what were both sides doing to try and make Portugal enter the war? That's a good question. In September 1939, Portugal is ruled by the conservative nationalist Antonio de Oliveira Salazar. He's part of the Estado Novo regime. This is an authoritarian regime that's ruled Portugal since 1933. But Salazar walks a tight line. On the one hand, he's bound to Britain in the Anglo-Portuguese alliance. This alliance goes back to 1374, and it's the oldest in the world. But he also opposes entering the war after the dreadful consequences of the Portuguese entry into the First World War. Salazar declares Portuguese neutrality September 5th, 1939, since Britain do not request Portuguese aid. I do not know, nor does anyone, what would have happened had the British asked for Portuguese assistance. Still, the way things played out, Salazar is fully committed to neutrality, and the British are fine with this. He is, in fact, so committed to neutrality that he signs the Pacto Iberico with Francisco Franco's Spain. That pact promotes cooperation and neutrality on the Iberian Peninsula. It is used by Franco to help thwart German attempts for Spanish entry into the war. By 1940, Portugal starts leaning a bit towards the Allied camp. Salazar allows Gibraltarian people from Gibraltar, refugees, to be housed on Madeira. And later in the war, Portuguese aircraft from the Azores will also conduct flights in defense of Allied shipping convoys. Any military action is still way out of the picture. And somewhat refreshingly, I guess, both the Allied and Axis camps seem to respect this. No side makes any real requests for Portuguese entry into the war. And Portugal enjoys a peaceful neutrality, trading pretty heavily with both Britain and Germany. Thalis Kalapotakos, yeah, cool, asks, to what extent did the Kriegsmarine match the Royal Navy? Okay. In 1935, in a British effort to appease the rearming Nazi Germany, British Foreign Minister Sir Samuel Hoare signs the Anglo-German Naval Treaty. This treaty regulates the size of the newly created Kriegsmarine in terms of total tonnage to be a max 35% of the Royal Navy. There's a separate clause which accepts the German U-boat fleet to be 45% of the British one. Adolf Hitler actually adheres to this treaty right up until late 1938, when he decides that war with Britain and France is coming and the Kriegsmarine should be prepared and rearmed, same as the Wehrmacht and the Luftwaffe. Hitler and Grand Admiral Erich Raeder design and approve a plan for a large shipbuilding program to create a massive surface fleet by 1944. Side note here, Raeder is not a big fan of U-boats, thinking them obsolete, and he prefers larger surface ships. So U-boat construction does not feature heavily in his shipbuilding program. Nevertheless, when the war breaks out, the Kriegsmarine is woefully underprepared in comparison with the other two service branches. This is the state of the Kriegsmarine on the outbreak of war. They have 2 battleships, 3 pocket battleships, 7 cruisers, 21 destroyers, 12 torpedo boats, and 57 U-boats. They do not have any aircraft carriers. So the Kriegsmarine is dwarfed by the Royal Navy. 15 battleships and pocket battleships, 7 aircraft carriers, 66 cruisers, 184 destroyers, and 60 submarines. Raeder does have an advantage, though. While the Kriegsmarine is more or less united outside of northern Germany, the Royal Navy is spread thin throughout the world, protecting colonies, trade routes, supply convoys. A large part of it is in the Far East to protect against potential Japanese aggression. Another part is in the Mediterranean. Nevertheless, though, the Royal Navy is a real force with which to be reckoned, protecting the Channel from any German attacks. The British also have the various Commonwealth navies around the world who help them out. In 1940 and 1941, large battleships like the Bismarck and Tirpitz, as well as other warships, are laid down, but German Naval High Command realizes they cannot hope to match the enormous Royal Navy. Instead, they turn towards U-boat building in an attempt to cut off the Allied supply routes. We shall see how that works out. Well, that is it for today. If you want me to answer your own question, you can submit it at our community forum at community.timeghost.tv. Link is in the video description. Join the Time Ghost Army at patreon.com or timeghost.tv so me, can continue to bring you awesome content. Subscribe, ring that bell. See you next time.